Hi everyone, welcome to This Week in Space Science. I'm Michael Baltimore, your host for the show, and we're very happy to have, as usual, Dr. Sean Cruzen, the director of the Coca-Cola Space Science Center here at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. Sean, welcome to another show.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here.
Well, you know, there's so many things that we have to talk about. There's so many things going on. Just a while back, we talked about a meteorite, an asteroid, those things coming toward Earth. Just for my sake here, there's no meteorites or asteroids heading to blow Earth up this week. Is there, that you know of?
I'm absolutely not going to confirm that because there could be one that I don't know about.
Okay.
That's what happened when the Russian meteor came in. So
Okay.
it kind of snuck in there.
All right, so
actually, this isn't on our script, but just a side note, they figured out where that one came from.
Oh yeah.
It actually came from the asteroid belt, belongs to this group called the Apollo asteroids. They are potential Earth crossers. So they were able to use the video shot by all those amateur video cameras and actually trace back its the path that it entered Earth's atmosphere and figure out where it came from.
Okay, so that's good to know because it just kind of popped up. We were watching the other one, right? And then there's another one that came
Hey,
up.
look over here.
That's very interesting. So, all right, so we're safe for this week.
I didn't say that, Mike.
Oh, you didn't say that,
I will
did you?
neither
You
confirm
just-
nor deny that we're actually safe.
Well, it's all about you being correct on these things, whether the Earth blows up or not. I want to make sure that
The Earth blows up. I don't want people coming back to me and saying,
That's
hey,
exactly
the
right.
Earth blew
Very
up.
nice. That's
Why
a good,
didn't you tell us?
That is a very good point. All right, so let's jump into our topic today a little bit. We're going to talk about something that I thought we wouldn't be talking about for a long time, and that's manned spaceflight.
Yes.
But it seems to be coming from one of our good friends at a private agency for space travel, and this one has something to do with Mars.
Yeah,
Are you kidding me? Mars.
This is a very historic story that's taking place. You know, and I'll preface the story by saying I was privileged enough to be able to attend a conference called the International Commercial Spaceflight Conference.
Okay.
And I really got a look into the commercial and private spaceflight industries to be able to see how far they've come and how close they really are to being able to launch a whole variety of missions, taking people from the general public into space. And you know, you and I on previous seasons of this show have talked about Virgin Galactic and talked about Elon Musk, and of course that's SpaceX and Virgin Galactic. Those are probably the two best known commercial spaceflight companies. But there are many, many other organizations out there that are really advancing the commercial spaceflight industry. They've made great strides toward being ready to launch people, and within the next half decade, you're going to see an enormous number of commercial spaceflight companies have some tremendous success in a variety of space ventures that we, in our lifetime, earlier would have thought about only happening from NASA or from other governmental space agencies.
It's very interesting the way that you've just described that is that people are rushing toward this business opportunity, if you will. Is there money to be made in this type of venture? Because I think it would take a lot of investment capital up front to build a rocket and the launch and to get out there, and the scientists and everything that goes with it.
Absolutely, and you're not wrong about that. Certainly, there are a lot of dollars being poured into commercial spaceflight that won't have an immediate return. And the joke is, how do you make a million? How do you become a millionaire in the commercial spaceflight industry?
Right.
And the joke is you start off by being a billionaire, right? So,
so
you kind of travel backwards, and that's what a lot of these people. So a lot of these people who we know about in the commercial spaceflight industry, they're billionaires, and they're sacrificing. Because of their own interests in pursuing this, and because they do see a capital return on their investment sometime in the more distant future. And so, so you have people like Elon Musk, who is a PayPal founder. You have
Elon
people
Musk.
like Richard Branson, who is a founder of the Virgin Empire, Virgin Records, Virgin Cell Phones, Virgin Airlines, all that industry. And you have a guy like Dennis Tito. And he's the guy that we came to talk about today.
All right, let's talk about this guy.
Dennis Tito is a person who graduated from New York University, had an aeronautics and astronautics bachelor's engineering degree, went on, got his master's degree in engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic University.
You know, I think, excuse me, I'm sorry, it just occurred to me, I think I've seen a picture of this guy. He's a snazzy snappy dresser as well.
Dennis,
You know,
Dennis
Maybe I
can
don't know
dress
if we
very
pull that
snappily on occasion. And,
Okay, I'm sorry. There
he
you go.
is,
I got
there he is,
distracted
exactly.
because look at this outfit this guy's got on there.
Well, that would distract anyone, and I think that's the whole point with this particular outfit. You know, he doesn't have the Tony Stark hair, so he's got to go with the clothing. That's all I'm saying.
But he has a strong educational background.
He does.
After
His master's degree, he went on to work for JPL.
Okay.
So he was literally a rocket scientist with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, worked on missions like the Viking missions to Mars. So he has a very engineering and rocket science-based background. He took his knowledge about the analysis of data from these rocket missions, and he applied that to the financial world. And he became a multi-billionaire in the financial world by analyzing market investments and by being able to take other people's money and make more money for them. So,
wow, so taking that analysis information from a science discipline and applying it in a financial discipline, and all of a sudden, he's got a lot of money.
He's got a lot of money, exactly. So the holdings of his company were once estimated at $12 trillion. So that was where he was, you know, in terms of how much money he was holding for other people's investments and things.
Very cool.
The idea is that he has a few dollars tucked away.
Got a few dollars to do something with.
So in the late 1990s, he had the idea that he really wanted to go to space, and he was willing to pay his way there. Now, at that time, no one in the history of any kind of spaceflight ventures was ever able to pay their way onto a flight. You really had to go through the right stuff NASA training, or similar training with other nations like Russia, and become, through the test pilot ranks and then accepted into their astronaut or cosmonaut corps. That was the only way to space. Yep. Dennis Tito was the first person to ever pay his way into space, thereby becoming the first ever space tourist. In fact, that term, space tourism, was coined based on his mission. This photograph right here, you're seeing, this is his return trip from a Russian Soyuz capsule that went up to the International Space Station.
He looks very happy about this.
He's very happy. NASA was not at all happy. They were incredibly opposed to this particular trip. In fact, the NASA director at the time, Daniel Golden, was adamantly proposed, and they actually kept them out of the Johnson Space Center when the cosmonauts showed up for training, because the cosmonauts brought Dennis Tito with them and said, he's one of us, we need to bring him in for training. And NASA really closed down their training and said, absolutely not, we will not do this.
How about that?
So this was a big deal at the time. Now, obviously, we know what the end of that story was. NASA themselves has kind of capitulated to the whole commercial spaceflight industry. So Dennis Tito, in some ways, you can kind of say, change the paradigm for spaceflight in the United States of America and even worldwide, in terms of really opening things up for the commercial spaceflight industry, being the first space tourist ever to go to the International Space Station. Now he's coming up with a brand new venture.
Okay,
at the vanguard of what we would call deep space exploration from commercial spaceflight companies. So when we say deep space, we mean out of the Earth's orbit. So beyond just simply going up and orbiting around the Earth, getting out of Earth orbit and going somewhere else. Dennis Tito wants to fund and wants to organize the first ever manned trip around Mars. So out to Mars, around the backside, and then back to the Earth. Now that trip normally would take a very, very long time, but in 2018, through an alignment of nature, really nothing to do with anything human controlled, the planets Earth and Mars are going to be on what we call a close approach. They're going to be very near to one another. And so during that time, it takes less fuel and it takes less time to blast a rocket into space and travel around the backside of Mars and then come back to the Earth again.
That is not that far in the distant future. I mean, 2018.
It's a mere 5 years from right now.
Okay, all right.
Right, so what they're trying to do, the foundation called Inspiration Mars, and Inspiration Mars is Dennis Tito's foundation that he's in charge of. They want to organize this first ever tourism trip to fly around the backside of Mars.
Wow, that sounds like a wonderful trip. So they're not going to land. They're not attempting to land and take off.
They're not going to land, actually.
This is going to tour around Mars on the backside and back out.
And part of the reason is we simply don't have the technology right now to be able to do that. We don't have the space vehicles in place. And what Dennis Tito is proposing to do is, don't invent anything new. Just use everything that's off the shelf right now, everything that's already developed or being developed at the current time, and use those tools to make this fly around the backside of Mars possible, and truly historic, actually. first people to ever fly around the planet Mars. That's what they're trying to do.
All right, so this sounds possible then.
It's not only possible, it's actually probable. Now, whether they'll achieve it by 2018, we don't know. But this is something that they could achieve within a window of time around that time and actually accomplish that. That's because the biggest technological hurdle that remains is simply this heavy lift rocket. You need a rocket that's bigger than your average rocket to get out of Earth's gravitational pull.
Okay.
So this is a rocket that's being developed by SpaceX. This thing is called the Falcon 9 Heavy. It's basically 3 Falcon 9s all tethered together. So the Falcon 9 is the rocket that SpaceX is currently using to launch back and forth to the International Space Station.
Right.
The Falcon Heavy is 3 of those rockets attached to one another, so to have 3 times that payload lift, and that would have enough capability to not only get a payload large enough for people to stay in outside of Earth orbit, but get it all the way to Mars, slingshot it around the backside, and head back to the Earth. So really, that's the biggest hurdle. And here's our guy, Elon Musk.
Yeah, there he is. Elon Musk, he's one of my favorites too.
He's clearly the leading pioneer in the commercial spaceflight industry. As we're filming the show today, tomorrow he's scheduled to have a flight of that very same Falcon 9 rocket in this picture to take the second ever commercial payload to the International Space Station. So he's clearly leading the way. He's winning this private space race right now, he and his company. But he would be the person who would be building the Falcon 9 Heavy. He and the folks at SpaceX.
Okay, so Dennis Tito is working with Elon Musk and his company,
Exactly.
SpaceX, to make this mission possible.
In fact, not only is he working with Elon Musk and SpaceX, but he's working with a variety of private and commercial spaceflight companies, including Bigelow Aerospace, that will build some kind of an inflatable habitat that they can blow up on this spacecraft heading for Mars and actually dwell in part-time. So this is actually an artist concept of what that mission would look like. That's the space capsule, that inflatable module out there on the front of it. The capsule is, of course, the Dragon capsule from SpaceX, and this is the system that they're hoping to ride. Now, here's the thing.
Okay.
Any person that would accept this mission to space would be confined to an area roughly the size of a small motorhome, kind of like a little smaller Winnebago.
Right. Well, like Daniel's apartment, or maybe Elmo's
Something like that, exactly.
Something like that, yeah.
So imagine Daniel being locked in to your apartment with your very best friend for 500 days.
Okay.
That's almost 2 years. It's a better part of 2 years. That's how long the space mission would last. And remember, it's not like you get to Mars and you get to get out, walk around, go to the convenience store, have a soda, nothing like that. What you have to do is you have to stay inside that capsule for almost 2 years. And so a big component of allowing this mission to be successful is choosing the right people that can stand to cohabitate for that long of a period of time in that very, very confined space.
Wow.
Now, if you're out there and you're listening, and you're thinking maybe you're the right person.
Yeah,
Let me tell you specifically what they're looking for. They're actually looking for a married couple.
Oh, there you go.
They want a married couple to go into space for 500 days together in something like a small motorhome. And apparently they were never on any of the family vacations with my family because...
I'm thinking as a marriage therapist here, I was just thinking, is this a newlywed couple or is this somebody who's been together for a while?
Well, what would you recommend? That's a good point. Maybe we should turn to your expertise on this.
Well, I certainly would recommend that they've had some time in that marriage to get beyond the honeymoon phase and then move into working through issues, maybe a little experience there. But I find that very fascinating. So they're looking for a married couple to go on this trip. Absolutely.
Yes, they are.
And I assume that it's not just they may need somebody to do some science experiments or other things, so that they may have a background.
There will be some technical expertise. There will be some physical requirements. But honestly, we're joking around about it. But think seriously. A huge component to whether this mission would be successful or not is whether these people can hold it together psychologically in that tiny confined space. But it's not just that. It's being in that very, very hazardous environment, being literally that far away from home. It's an incredible distance, 30 million miles from your home planet. These kinds of things begin to affect people psychologically. So there will be a very rigorous screening process to have the right psychological characteristics in place to allow this mission to be successful.
So how many days in this entire trip?
500 days.
500 days.
Now get this, this almost seems the worst part to me. So you've been gone for 490 days.
Yes.
And you're on your way back. You've flown around Mars. It was great. You got some pictures. You got a T-shirt. You're on your way back.
Here we go. All right.
And what has to happen in that last 10 days is that they perform what's called an aerobrake maneuver. If you ever saw the movie 2010, that movie showed an aerobrake maneuver in it, but it's where the spacecraft actually uses the gravity of the planet to slow it down and end up in some kind of a stable orbit. So it's zipping by at a very high speed, but it passes close enough to the planet that the planet's gravitational field allows for them to perform a maneuver where that would decelerate the spacecraft and then go into an orbit. Well, the orbit for that Mars craft would be about a 10-day orbit. So they would pass by the Earth in a never performed before space maneuver, this aerobraking, go out, and then they would have to orbit for another 10 days. Now remember, that's at the end of 490 days. You just went around Mars. You just performed an incredibly dangerous maneuver. You've been in this tiny capsule for 490 days.
You're ready to go.
With your
You're
spouse.
ready to get out of this thing. Okay, got it.
10 more days around the
10
Earth
more.
before you can come back down and re-enter Earth's atmosphere safely and hopefully splash down with nice parachutes in the ocean.
Well,
that's the end of the Dennis Tito vision right there.
All right.
For Inspiration Mars.
All right. I am totally fascinated that this would happen in the next 5 years.
5 years.
As it's planned out at this particular moment. All right.
It's a very ambitious plan, but seriously, it could happen.
Right.
And here's the interesting thing.
Well,
missions like this, not necessarily this mission, but missions like this in the future that are taking space tourists to Mars might actually happen in the state of Georgia. They might actually launch from the state of Georgia because there's a group within the state of Georgia right now that's working on constructing a commercial spaceport, a launch facility on the Atlantic coast of Georgia over in Camden County. And SpaceX is one of the companies that's expressed some level of interest in possibly establishing a launch facility at that site if it's constructed. So think of it, in 15 years, we might actually be seeing people who are traveling to Mars launching from the state of Georgia on SpaceX rockets.
all right. It'll take me a little while to absorb that.
I'll be honest, you and I haven't done this show for that many years, but when we first started filming the show and we're talking all about the shuttle program, I would say that you and I, neither one would ever imagine that would even be close to a reality.
No.
Whereas now it's just around the corner. It literally is the next step in American spaceflight.
And Georgia has the land. It's close to the ocean. It's
Georgia has already acquired the land.
Yeah.
They're doing at this time. They're doing environmental studies to make sure that the environmental impact will be within guidelines that are acceptable, and then they will start working on the development phase. So that really is a plan that's moving forward, and it's very interesting stuff.
Well, it is fascinating, and I tell you what, I would not bet against Elon Musk on any of these things. Let me tell you.
Well, and see, people who know Dennis Tito are basically saying the same thing about him.
Kind of thing with
when he
Dennis
enters
Tito,
into endeavors, he basically succeeds, and so you really do have a very talented brain trust of people in the commercial spaceflight industry in the United States that are pushing this project. So it very well may succeed.
Well, I am so glad you brought this story in today. It's fascinating, and we've got to keep an eye on this story as it develops, because we're going to hear more and more about it here. All right, so what's next on our list to talk about today? I'm going to leave it up to you to introduce this next one.
Well, the next thing that we're going to share with you is a discovery that was made about black holes. And I figured that might give us an opportunity to talk briefly about black holes, because so many people are very interested in that particular subject.
Right.
They're so weird. They're such a strange object out there in space.
Right.
It seems to spark people's imagination. So a recent discovery was that black holes actually spin, and they spin at roughly 30% the speed of light, which is an incredible rate of speed. So how does that happen? Right. What is a black hole?
Yes.
How does it get there?
We need to start there.
All
because
these kinds of questions that we can ask.
A lot of basic questions about black holes, and typically they're maybe at the center of a lot of galaxies. Not every galaxy, but a lot of galaxies, right?
So let's back up a step and talk about the two varieties of black holes. And first of all, we have our garden variety black hole.
Oh, you just happen to have one here on the set.
This is not, in fact, an actual black hole.
It's like a white hole, but
this is a rubber ball. But I'm going to use this for a variety of demonstrations as I employ spheres in many explanations about astrophysics. So here's a small sphere.
Yes.
So let's pretend for a moment that this sphere is a dying star. And at the core of this dying star, the star has used up all its nuclear fuel, and it can no longer support its tremendous weight, and so it's about to collapse in on itself.
Gravity is pulling it in.
Gravity is pulling it in, yeah.
Right.
Every star is a delicate balance between pressure wanting to blow it apart and gravity wanting to crush it out of existence. And once that fuel is used up in the core, there's no more heat being generated, so the pressure falls off. So gravity begins to win the battle. And if a star is sufficiently large, much larger than our sun, then a star can actually collapse in on itself. It rebounds, the outer layers rebound in what's called a supernova explosion, so that blows up. But the inner core then will collapse down to a point called a singularity. And it literally is this: no structure known to physics can support the massive weight of the core of that dead star. And if the core is big enough, and that's true, then that mass all collapses down to, it's really a mathematical abstraction called a singularity. Infinite mass in a zero volume space. Now that's something we can't really imagine. And in fact, our ability to describe the physics of what's taking place in such a weird region actually breaks down.
Right, beyond the laws of any physics that we know at this point.
Exactly. So obviously scientists end up being very curious about black holes. People in general end up being very curious about black holes because it just all sounds so weird. If light were to get close enough to that collapsed stellar core, that black hole, light would even fall in. Even light's not moving fast enough to escape the bent space, the warped space-time that is a collapsed singularity, a black hole. So literally as all that mass gathers together, it literally bends the fabric of space down into a single point, and inside that single point is the containment of all of that mass that used to be the core of that star. Okay. So an incredibly weird situation, right?
And it's also pulling in everything around it as well. If you get close, it's going to just suck everything into this black hole.
And the right thing is to say, if you get close. Now, you can't think of a black hole like a giant vacuum cleaner that's pulling further and further things out. In fact, if there had been a planet orbiting around that star before it blew up, and if that planet had managed to survive the supernova explosion where it was still orbiting, it would still think that it was orbiting the parent star, because there's really no more mass there than was there to begin with when the star was still a star. So the black hole doesn't pull that planet in. In fact, that planet continues to orbit happily, more or less. But this material that's right around the black hole, if it gets in close enough, and there's a radius around the black hole called the Schwarzschild radius, if it gets near that Schwarzschild radius, it's going to fall into the black hole. So that's in that containment region that it begins to act like a vacuum cleaner, like this weird sci-fi kind of concept, where it pulls in all mass and even light. So that Schwarzschild radius is defined by how much mass is in the center. Okay. Now what we've just described is a garden variety black hole, if there is such a thing.
Right. Well,
So it's what we would consider a typical black hole.
Okay.
They have masses anywhere from 3 to 10 times the mass of the sun, something like that. Okay. They're on order of the mass of a star. But we have now found in the last few decades these weird objects that tend to be at the centers of galaxies. And those black holes that are at the centers of galaxies, they are black holes, but they are not like the garden variety stellar black hole. They are what we call supermassive black holes. They can contain the mass equivalent to something between 1 and 2 million times the mass of our sun.
Wow.
And so those things have a Schwarzschild radius then that is much, much larger and dominates the center area of galaxies. Now, as this material would fall into that one-way cul-de-sac, that black hole, as that stuff would fall in, before it hits the Schwarzschild radius, it can radiate off radiation like crazy. So in other words, it's getting hotter and hotter, and hot things glow. So as this stuff moves towards the Schwarzschild radius, it's emitting its last light out into the universe, usually in the form of X-rays from the superheated material. And that's really what you see. People ask this question a lot. How do you see a black hole? We talk about, well, we've observed black holes and things. How do you see that? Well, with the stellar-sized black holes, it's usually because it's got a companion orbiting around it. So once this black hole is formed, a lot of black holes have a second star that tends to be orbiting around them. Okay. And so we watch the motion of the second star. If it doesn't have a second star, then we have to rely on this material that's orbiting around, getting ready to fall in like soap going down a drain. We can measure that material. with the absence of either one of those things, you really couldn't measure the black hole. There would be no way to measure
that's
it.
what I was thinking. It must be very, very hard to locate these, and you have to use other objects around the black hole to even know that it's there.
There's a saying I have from my astronomy class, which is simply this: astronomy is prejudiced to things that glow in the dark. If something doesn't glow in the dark, we can't see it. We can't observe it.
Right.
So something either has to be generating its own light, or it has to be affecting an object that does generate light through some force like gravity. And so that's how we see these black holes, because we don't see the black hole itself, we see the other objects or the other material that black hole is affecting gravitationally.
And so it might be spinning around that. So you're talking about stars spinning around.
With a supermassive black hole, it can be star-sized objects. You can have whole pools of stars or giant amounts, massive amounts of gas at the center of galaxies that form these huge, what we call accretion disk, and accretion just means it's going to become part of the central object eventually, but right now it's just kind of being pulled onto it. It's the accretion disk of this black hole at the center of a galaxy called NGC 1365, about 56 million light years from our own Milky Way, that scientists were able to observe, and they noticed anomalies in the way the X-ray radiation was coming off of that accretion disk. They used that in a very ingenious way to figure out how this black hole actually rotates. And so they were able to measure for the first time the spin of a black hole using a telescope called NuSTARS, and NuSTARS is an acronym. It's a NASA telescope for observing nuclear emissions from black hole regions. They were able to tell that black hole, that object at the center, is spinning at 30% the speed of light, approximately 1 billion kilometers per hour. So you might wonder, well, why would a black hole be spinning? Well, remember, it was made out of mass. There is actually a mass in there, even though it's very, very small. If you think about an ice skater, how does an ice skater control a spin? Well, an ice skater begins a spin, and then they pull their arms in, and as they pull their arms in, they speed up.
Faster.
Yeah, that's due to a process called the conservation of angular momentum. When the ice skater's spinning really fast, what does the ice skater want to do to slow down? Well, they stick their arms back out again, right? And so if the black hole operates on those same principles of physics, which it does, as that material collapsed down into that singularity, it's like an ice skater really pulling their arms in, right? And so what began as a fairly pedestrian kind of rotation, by the time you pull it down to an infinitely small volume, you have one incredibly fast rotating set of mass. And so the rotation of this black hole has been speculated in the past, but now has been measured for the first time with this telescope called NuSTARS from NASA.
That is very interesting. You know, those phenomena, the black hole out there, and just being able to figure out where they are and what they're doing, this is a major move forward, I think, in terms of the spinning and measuring that for the first time.
And plus, now that they have the technique, they've refined this technique, and this was their first set of measurements, they can now apply that technique to other black holes and probe the physics of black holes even more deeply. And so that's a very interesting development in the area of that branch of astrophysics, dealing with black holes.
You know, I enjoyed that, and thank you for bringing in the props too, the black hole props. Very informative here. All right, so let's talk about something a little closer to home. I know you guys had a big event at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center, and I think we've got some footage, we've got some photographs. We want to take a look at all of these things. We want to make sure that these things give our viewers here a real glimpse and an idea of what happened just recently at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. Tell us a little bit about what happened.
Last year, at the end of a very long process, the Columbus State University Coca-Cola Space Science Center was awarded possession of a space shuttle main engine nozzle.
There you go.
An extraordinarily valuable and historic artifact from the space shuttle program. It has now come to live at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center on Front Avenue. We've been in transit mode for a while. It's been in various secret storage locations on campus after we took possession of it from the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. But now I am happy to announce that the space shuttle main engine nozzle has found its home at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. Now, that was not necessarily an easy transition.
I was thinking there might be a little trouble here.
It's a little bit more complicated than...
It could have happened maybe a little faster, but there was a complication of some sort.
There was a variety of issues, and one of the issues that's held it up for so long from moving straight into our facility is we have a kind of limitation on our building, and that's this. It's our building at heart is a metal building, It's got steel beams. It's got a big glass storefront. These steel beams that run around the periphery of our building, the tallest ones off the ground are only 8 feet high.
Oh.
Well, you see the Space Shuttle main engine nozzle itself is 8 feet in diameter. Now, I'm exaggerating only slightly. The clearance on that beam was about 8 foot 6.5 inches. And the Space Shuttle main engine nozzle, which you see right there, this is that nozzle off the back end of the actual orbiter when it went into space.
Right.
It has a diameter of about 8 feet. And so there wasn't a lot of clearance. By the time it was actually on its stand, which it had to sit on in order to be in our lobby and for us to be able to move it in,
right,
it raised it to about 8 feet 6.5 inches.
Okay.
Or maybe 8 foot 7.5 inches.
Oh yes.
Because after a number of variety of tries, we see here that well, on this particular attempt, it didn't make it into our building. It actually bumped into the steel beam.
I mean, it looks like it's about an inch difference there, but
when I say it bumped into the steel beam, don't worry if you're watching. We didn't actually ram it into the steel beam. We simply moved it up and saw that it was not going to fit underneath it. So this was an incredible set of engineering. And what had to be done is that this nozzle had to be taken back out.
Okay.
The stand that it was sitting on had to be taken out back to the steel shop
and lowered. All right, there we see the stand, this red piece of material.
It's that wedge-shaped red piece of steel, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So this is the workers working on it. They're hooking it back up to the crane at this point. I think this is after attempt number 1 to get it into the building. This is where they had to take it back off again, take the cradle back to the shop, and do a little cutting on it. They had to cut an 1.5 inches off that base, off the bottom end, and then try the whole process again to bring it back into the...
Okay, first you try, and so forth. Now, it looks like it was raining that day, too, so
it was not only raining, it was raining cats and dogs. It was torrential rain, which was great. Made the field outside my building very, very soggy. But anyway, there's happy news. I wanted to say that it did manage to make it inside successful.
Well, that is the good news, and I know that you brought you brought actually a video.
We did.
Time-lapse video that we want to queue up and see that coming in. Now, it looks like a lot of our plant ops and some other people that were contracted there.
Exactly.
Trying to maneuver, but it's in the building at that point.
It's in the building at the it up. So this is a great time-lapse video, and what you're going to see is my entire staff working late on a Sunday night. This is after our
Sunday night.
This is a Sunday night. Well, you say, well, we don't work on Sunday nights. Well, we do.
Right.
And that's because we had a comic book show that same day, and we wanted to leave our old mock-up of our Apollo capsule in place for one last event. It was the swan song for the Apollo capsule. And what you're seeing right now is you're seeing my team and myself in there.
Moving very fast.
This is how fast we move all the time.
All right, that's what I was
saying. So we're in there disassembling the interior of the Apollo capsule, moving it out of the way because it's that very space that the new Space Shuttle main engine nozzle is going to occupy. So for 17 years almost, that Apollo capsule has been a centerpiece of our displays at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. It was with a great amount of sadness that we. Well, you
those
can see
guys were just
teeter-tottering back and forth.
Yeah,
yes,
they looked like they were using that as a teeter-totter.
They were indeed. So I guess maybe not entirely a great amount of sadness.
All right, there we go. We got to have a little fun while we're there.
Exactly. You can't have all sadness. So anyway, with some level of heavy heart, that we said goodbye to our old friend, the Apollo capsule.
The Apollo capsule does have another place. You're going to put it somewhere else in the building.
It's somewhere else now.
Okay.
That's all I can say.
So
what you've seen is
at some point we have to start cleaning up around here.
Exactly. So this is our custodian, Miss Yolanda. Miss Yolanda, I cut out a little bit of the nighttime footage.
By the way, is by herself. I mean, there was 1,500 people we've seen so far. Now there's one person kind of cleaning it up.
There's about 20 of us that made the mess. There's only Miss Yolanda to clean it up. So this is her cleaning it up, getting the area spick and span, and now we're seeing the arrival of the construction crews in the morning. They came in to check out that door frame. And what you're about to see in a moment is the actual disassembling of our front entrance by this construction crew. So here they are. They're actually pulling out what's called our storefront glass, the sliding glass doors, and they're making way for the nozzle to enter the building. So you're about to see them. They're going to pull the door frame off. Here they go. They're going to move it over to the side. We had to unhook our fire system from that particular front door, or the power that moved that door in and out. Mind you, the fire alarm is still on for the rest of the building, but just the switch at that doorway right there. Right, we had to disconnect all of our power and phone from our current front desk. And now we're awaiting the first arrival of the nozzle, and you're going to see it just kind of poke its way in here in a second. Yep, there it was. There it came and went.
Look, it went back out. What happened to
it?
Well,
that was golly, it didn't fit. So here it comes the second time. And this is where we tried everything in the world to get this thing to fit under that steel beam that's right there at the top of that door entrance.
You got that header for that big door and the glasses.
Now listen, it may not have looked like it in that scene because they were going rather quickly there.
Wait a minute,
but those guys were being very, very careful. They only bumped the top frame a little bit.
Okay.
With the space shuttle nozzle.
Just rip that metal up to the side.
They were trying to pull the metal up to see if they could make a little extra space for it to fit under, but even that didn't work.
Okay. All right,
so now we pulled that metal entirely out of the way. Now, mind you, I've cut some footage out of here too, but this is where that base has gone back off to the steel shop, has been cut, and now it's going to come back an inch and a half shorter than when it first arrived.
There we go.
For try number 3. And so we were awaiting try number 3, and that's going to happen in mere seconds. Right, here it comes.
And there guys,
and as you can see,
all right, yes.
There it is.
Congratulations. All right, got to put that door back on there, guys. All right, let's get on it. Let's get the door back. All right.
The exciting arrival of the space shuttle main engine nozzle, ladies and gentlemen.
That could have been me with the guy with the hammer about to hit something. To see, that's my favorite tool to take care of in most jobs.
Just beat on it some more.
Yeah,
it might fit.
Get a bigger hammer.
That's how we do things usually at the Space Science Center, but in that case, we were being very, very careful with that one-of-a-kind artifact.
Listen, that was great.
The happy part of that story is it's now inside the Space Science Center.
Well, yeah, congratulations,
Thank you
by
very
the
much.
way.
We appreciate that.
Listen, and thanks to your crew and the plant ops and all the other guys that were there available and get that thing in the building.
One quick important announcement is it won't be on display until April 1st. So it's in there. We've kind of got it covered up. We need to make it look a little snazzy, a little up to the Space Science Center standards.
Right.
Before we show that off to the general public, we want to make sure the floor area is all safe.
Sure.
So it's going to take us about 3 or 4 weeks to get that up, ready to go. By April 1st, you'll be able to come to the Space Science Center and see that piece of space history.
Well, we got to go.
It flew on 4 different space shuttles. It's been to space 9 times. It took the current director of NASA, Charlie Bolden, to the Mir space station during the Russian Mir shuttle program back in a couple of decades ago. And so it's a very exciting piece of space history. Come on down and see it at the Space Science Center.
All right, that sounds great. April 1, you're going to unveil. All right, that is wonderful because been wondering about that. Had to do a little operation on the building itself to get it in. That's
a little surgery on the front of the building, but it's all back in place now. It's all good.
All right, that is very good news.
I would like to say a special shout out also to Mike Medlock, Kelly Wilson, the plant operations crew, Steve Morris, who helped us move that thing over from Huntsville.
Yep, absolutely.
Potiphar and all the guys at the transportation area that were able to transport that space shuttle nozzle. Thank you to all those people at CSU who've been able to help out with this project. We really, really appreciate it. We're doing it for the betterment of the city of Columbus, and now we have this one-of-a-kind artifact that's going to be a permanent resident here in downtown Columbus at the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. We're very happy about that.
Right, and congratulations on all that to all the guys that helped put that together and for you to have it there. So beginning of April, we get to see it unveiled.
April 1st.
Excellent. All right, that sounds really, really good. Well, Sean, this has been an exciting show today. We talked about the manned mission to Mars, we've talked about black holes, and we've talked about the space shuttle nozzle in the Coca-Cola Space Science Center. How good is that? All right, so thank you for being here today, bringing us all that good news. And ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for watching This Week in Space Science, TWISS, here at Columbus State Television. And we'll see you next time.